Hi, Richard.
Hi, Fran.
How are you?
I'm good. Yourself?
Excellent. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, today we have a very interesting topic because it's how to overcome the legacy systems limitations, and there is
Mm,
a whole topic there. And so this is a series of meetings we are having discussing things like throughput advantage without disruption. That was 2 weeks ago. And last week we discussed about enterprise grade features without enterprise budgets.
yeah.
And today is obviously the engine of all these, which are the systems. And
Yeah.
but we have to address something very important actually. Companies today they have very specific needs, and they've been working in the past in a way, and today the things advance too fast to catch up. So I think it's a good idea to understand what legacy systems, if they still playing a role, or if it's worth to keep investing on that, or to start to thinking strategically in the future.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing we would want to do is kind of identify what a legacy system
Right.
limitation is. What does it
Yeah.
look like? And you can go at that from multiple directions. First off, there's very few companies out there that are ever going to be able to match a tech-driven company, like a software company or a systems company and that kind of stuff, in terms of keeping up with technology trends, in terms of development cycle times and upgrades and advancements and staying on the leading edge of technology without spending too much time in the bleeding edge, all that kind of stuff. Um, that's kind of an old-fashioned approach. Companies designing and building their own software, right?
Right.
And I'd say right about now, a heck of a lot of those would be considered legacy systems. They were custom built. Perhaps they're not operating at peak effectiveness because, you know, uh, well, technology moves on. Software and
Yeah.
hardware has a very clear cycle. Hardware advances, software catches up, et cetera, and then software becomes too advanced for existing hardware, and on and on and on. There's also a lot of things around supporting a legacy system, right? One is the hosting environment. Very,
Right.
very difficult to compete with the hosted services that are available online, and adapt to them professionally. When it's not your core business, putting a lot of time and resources into something that is not your core business is typically not considered the best idea, you know.
Right.
And you know, I see it, if somebody was just to ask me flat out, would you advise we build our own software, that kind of stuff? My first response would typically be no. Find something in the market that works for you, where that company has economies of scale and expertise and have built it
Right.
up over time and plan on supporting it and have an upgrade path, and they plan on adapting to future conditions, things like AI come along and they already have a plan
Yeah.
for integrating the benefits, etc. Um, because keeping up with specific system companies is very, very difficult for an IT
Yeah.
department. It's very difficult. Um, and the expense of those resources versus the license fees, well, it's difficult to justify unless it's in a very, very specialized field where the operation of the software is around some kind of a secret formula
Right.
or intellectual property that's specific to your company and critical to your business. Unless you're going that direction, it's kind of like this. It's legal in the US and in some other jurisdictions to represent yourself as your own lawyer in a court of law,
Yeah.
right? You can do it, uh, but it is not advised, right? It's not recommended because of the amount of experience and the expense that can lead to and
Yeah.
the difficulties that it can lead to. So, operating on yourself, representing yourself in a court of law, And it's not about operating the software and knowing what you want. That should all be sitting with the customer. It's about it's about driving the technology forward and making
Right.
sure that there's smooth transitions without disruption and all sorts of benefits that you get from a software company that's
Yeah.
going to provide something. So I think a lot of companies gave up their legacy systems over the last 10 years and are transitioning to new environments. A lot of them are stuck in a gap where they've still got a few legacy systems or spreadsheet chaos, that kind of stuff. Another thing, has to do with if you're going to have a legacy system, then you're going to have legacy skills. And I've seen
Right.
a lot of people age out of their own software where the person who knew how to change it, adapt it, maintain it, improve it,
Yeah.
moved on to other roles or into promotions or even retired. I've seen that
Yeah.
a number of times where I've seen guys retire and there were software products that they custom built for customers out there. Who's going to pick up the mantle and make sure that it keeps progressing?
Yeah.
So with the word legacy, also comes legacy skills, legacy platforms, legacy development methods,
Yeah.
legacy technology, et cetera. So it can be a minefield. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's just why take the chance?
Yeah. And actually, who know? Actually, I'm particular now that actually these softwares that were built in-house on-prem on their own premises with their own servers and their own network. Um, Many of these people already are on the age of retiring or close to, and they
Yeah,
know every bolt, every fix, every patch that they build, but how to transfer all that knowledge to somebody else, and but having difficult, and not
yeah,
many people are very well. They're very good doing their job, but sometimes they don't have the right uh, operation standards of documenting everything and every to the T and the dot, because many of these
oh
times
yeah,
were built based on needs, urgencies, and requirements of the moment. So they move on, and then they pile up all these structure of software that today is very difficult to replace. Well, it's not difficult to replace. I say that it's difficult to maintain, particularly with, as you mentioned, all the software advanced, the service need to be upgraded,
hmm
and very difficult. And what is if somebody have, for example, on-prem and a legacy system that they build custom made for themselves?
mm,
What will be the key advantages to move to, for example, cloud with software like Trinity, where pretty much
mm.
is enterprise grade features into the mid-market SME space?
Yeah.
But because
Well,
I'll
there's
say
a
I hear that
yeah.
coming, right, like, oh no, this is too tailored to us. This is like a custom made suit to us.
Well, look, there's a number of things that you'll find in these, cloud. Look, the
Yeah,
cloud, it's just computers like you would have in your server room
right,
traditionally, right? In legacy systems, it's sitting on a server. The software is there. The cloud just means that you're accessing those servers via the internet as
right.
opposed to within your office via an intranet.
Yeah,
Um, the likelihood of a company competing against the economies of scale of the big cloud hosting platforms, it's
right.
practically impossible, right?
Yeah,
And the old concerns about security breaches and that kind of stuff are really, I've still seen enterprises today that insist on having their data on their premises,
yeah,
you know, believing that that makes it more secure. And that's not true. If you have network connectivity to your systems on site and you haven't mastered network security, then you know, you're at a higher risk of intrusion
yeah,
versus, a larger, like something like Microsoft Azure, something
yeah,
along those lines. You have disaster recovery, you have data redundancy, you have things like fire suppression and environmental control
yeah,
of the servers themselves, et cetera, et cetera. So you just go down a list. And I've made the case a couple of times where, a customer or a client when I was in my consulting days really thought that they needed a on-premise server
Right.
farm, for the applications. Now, in terms of your office network, that's one thing. But when you're talking about system hosting, software hosting and availability and disaster recovery and redundancies and that kind of thing, creating failover situations. If one server goes down, it switches to another one, that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. The expense of best practice redundancies and that kind of stuff is very, very high.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a psychological impact. It's not actually a technical it's not a technical quality that gets delivered. It lets people think we're in control and it's more secure and we have it in house and nobody can touch it. Well, there's all sorts of ways to exercise system intrusion, right?
Right.
And a lot of them have to do with social engineering and stuff like that and require physical access. But the point is, leave that specialty to the people who have the economies of scale. It's also down to, what price are you paying per gigabyte of storage? What price are you paying per transaction? Because
Yeah.
all the traffic costs money. All of the data storage costs money. Costs have come way down. But you're not going to compete in terms of cost against a large hosting provider.
Right.
So
Right.
companies like Trinity, I remember even 10 years ago, getting larger enterprises to put, things into the cloud in terms of ERP or accounting systems. Well, it was next to impossible to convince them
Yeah.
that was a good idea. There's just a perception that it was a massive security threat,
Yeah.
and it actually isn't. Not if good security protocols are put in place, good protections, good encryption, good this, that, and the other thing, right?
Right.
That can all be proven out through penetration testing and security testing, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that old-fashioned way of thinking, look, I've challenged a number of people on this. If it's good enough for a bank, how is it not good enough for you?
Yeah. Good
Right.
example.
And so if and everybody has this idea, somebody they watch too much TV about cracking into a bank. Yes, there have been big events and intrusions and data breaches over
Yeah.
time. But if your data is important enough and you get targeted, being on the cloud or being in-house is really very little barrier to you having it in-house.
Yeah.
Right? Take it from me, somebody who understands that space and what the black hats are trying to do in terms of breaching people's security.
Yeah.
You having your servers in the middle of your office in a glass enclosed server room with halon gas systems and temperature control and security for the door and stuff like that. That's very little barrier to somebody who really wants to get in there. It's kind of like, a lock on the door basically keeps out honest people. But if somebody rams a truck into the side of your house, they're
Yeah.
getting through the door, right? You just want to be aware of it as quickly as possible so you can respond to it. And I'm not saying that the cloud hosted solutions are a perfect solution. There's breaches all the time, all over the place. There's constant hacking traffic and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But do you want to rely on your own in-house resources to defend yourself from that, or a company that does it for a living?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think I see in terms of limitations that there are two distinct things. One is a technological limitation itself, like in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what you just mentioned, and then there's a psychological limitation. So the companies, not the companies, just the people concerns, and probably that is the biggest stopper, I'll say, because well, perhaps the lack of awareness, yeah, I say, more than anything
Yeah.
else, is like no, it's not really I wouldn't say lack of knowledge. It's a lack of awareness of what is capable the other side to do that today they are not familiarized with.
Yeah, and look, I've seen it happen over the last decade. Like I said, that
Yeah.
these companies are changing their mind. They're allowing
Right.
stuff to be hosted in the cloud. They're adopting the cost effectiveness of that approach,
Yeah.
and you definitely want to make sure that you've got the correct security in place, that the
Right.
application itself, is accessible in a way that is entirely secure. Of
Right.
course, you've got your own internal policies about not sharing passwords and all that other kind of stuff, but it can be managed. It's manageable whether it's hosted in-house or not.
Yeah.
And the price difference is vast. Like there's a huge gulf between using cloud hosted solutions and trying to do all of that
Right.
in-house. The reason why there's still a heck of a lot of in-house legacy systems is because they haven't aged out in terms of the servers, the depreciation, the expense
Yeah.
of it all,
All
which could
right.
have costed quite a bit some time ago, and they're just stretching it as far as they can before they swap things out. Now, if you built an in-house silo of little systems and stuff like that, and they're hosted internally, it's a bigger project to decide, well, I'm going to get rid of what I've got,
Yeah.
in order to use cloud. People aren't going to be motivated to go to cloud when they already own the server infrastructure. And that's really the only thing stopping companies. Anybody who is going through a decision-making process, though, is typically going with cloud-hosted solutions. They're
Right.
not choosing, in-house server technology and that kind of stuff. The days of buying blade after blade and setting up your own security, etc. Those days have kind of passed us
Yeah.
by. Um, but let's also broaden our definition of system.
Yeah.
I want to get to that because there is aged out software, there's older systems. Look, the idea that current modern well-designed software is not going to be as adaptable to your business model as
Right.
your custom-built software, it's just not true. It
Right.
doesn't, right. And even if there was a detail or two, an item or two that wasn't exactly 100% match, the cost benefit of going to something that you configure as
Yeah.
opposed to something that you customize is a massive gulf in terms of expense and risk to your business.
Right.
Customization is very pricey. Configuration is far easier to manage. So when you're doing system selection, if you're going away from in-house legacy systems, or your system is actually manual processes and spreadsheets and data collection and report generation, right? So let's not just talk about it in terms of software. A system that is legacy could also be manual methods and spreadsheets that were custom created for purpose and that kind of stuff. So going from that kind of system or an older pieces of software and transitioning to something more modern, you want to find something that is highly configurable, not something where you require right out of the gate customization. That's
Yeah.
the first one. If you have some kind of a complexity, I'm having difficulty thinking of one that demands customization in today's day and age with the number of products that are out there.
Right.
Um, then I guess that's the way you've got to go. But you would like at least 80% of it solved by somebody else. And then you get into a commercial arrangement whereby they create a customization that they intend to support just like their core solution, so
Yeah.
that you don't end up right back in the legacy boat,
Right.
right?
Right.
But I'd also like to discuss, system limitations
Mm.
as it applies to Greenfield sites, right? Now, Greenfield is somebody who doesn't have anything, or they've
Right.
got
Right.
a few smaller siloed systems that don't meet all of their needs. And they're in this brave new world and looking at various software packages, wondering which one they should pick and where they should go and that kind of stuff. And, what are the system limitations to spreadsheets and manual data collection and manual analysis and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff? Yeah.
Right.
Would you like to hit that subject up next?
Um, that would be a kind of a operational inefficiencies, isn't it? Like today, well, it doesn't mean that it's not efficient. It means actually I cannot imagine having binders and binders and binders of data, like data, I mean, sheets of things I actually have to do manually. So it's a system itself, I guess, but actually it's a very labor-intensive system that has to be done all manually. And probably that's a good question to ask. I say, do we
Well,
have
that's
a
why I put it in the same bucket. A legacy
yeah,
system could just as easily be, well, we've got a system, you know.
yeah,
Uh, they get the data, they generate the reports, we have a meeting on it, we make some
yeah,
decisions, and and we try to identify problems and fix them. That's a
yeah,
system, right? And it's just as important to address that situation as
yeah,
it is, I've got old software that's aging out.
yeah,
I mean, when data, look, data in and of itself doesn't have an inherent value, right?
yeah,
It's important to the process, and we'll get to that in a second. But when data is fragmented across
right,
legacy systems,
yeah,
right? Decision making slows down. It's just that simple. Reporting gets muddled. Performance bottlenecks can go unnoticed. This
yeah,
is where most operations live, in constant state of reactive chaos, right? And that is one of those places where a modern system that's highly configurable represents value,
right, right,
right? And whether it's multiple legacy systems, the likelihood that if you have a legacy operations management system, like an old maintenance or an old transaction
yeah,
processing or an older CRM kind of thing, spreadsheets, maybe some custom software, that kind of stuff, the data is trapped in those outdated, disconnected systems,
yeah, yeah,
right?
that's true.
And that leads to operational blind spots. It can lead to errors, rework, compliance risk, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I would say that operational control kind of goes through multiple phases, from reactive, entirely reactive, to reducing your reaction time, right? So that's kind of a hindsight sort of thing.
yeah,
Is all of this data is hindsight. How quickly you're able to collect that data and turn it into information for decision support,
right,
that's critical,
yeah,
right? Changing that time frame. If it's within the hour, if it's within the day, as opposed to a weekly report or monthly report, an annual report, God
yeah,
forbid, right? By the time you've received that information, it's too late.
yeah,
All you can talk about is history, right? And you can't change history. And then you start hunting and pecking, trying to figure out how we're going to change the future.
yeah,
And by the time you find out whether your changes were effective, it's too late again to adjust those activities. It can be quite a trap,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Now, even better than reaction is, like reactive control being a short time frame, right? The reporting time frame from when the data is created from an operational execution or transaction to the point where you see that data in an informational context, collected into metrics against baselines and targets and that kind of
right,
stuff. That time frame is mission critical for decision support.
yeah,
It's it's an even better achievement if you can go from reactive to preventive, when you
right,
start being able to see patterns, right? So you want to have the reactive time as short as possible. And then you also begin to be able to forecast preventive stuff,
right,
right? And you're able to even do, some scenario testing, or
yeah,
you're able to do preventive things and get immediate feedback on whether or not it was effective. It's
right,
basically like, okay, we're going to do an inspection of all of our vehicles every single day. Yeah. Well, very quickly, you're going to find out if you've got the right feedback mechanism for all of those inspections and you're not doing a monthly report, right? If it's like on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis that everything is being consolidated, you might notice that you're still having problems that your inspections are not addressing, that were not identified,
right,
right? that's an ineffective inspection, right? So you thought it would solve the problem, but very quickly you find out not quite,
Yeah.
So you want to be able to make adjustments as quickly as possible, right?
Right.
That's just one example where turnaround time is critical.
Yeah.
The holy grail is predictive control. Once you can get, into short reaction time and prevention, you
Yeah.
can actually start looking at things in terms of predictive control. And that's kind of the holy grail of information
Right.
turnaround.
Right.
Turning data into information to the point where you can start recognizing patterns. If A happens, B happens historically, and it'll have a certain pattern to it.
Yeah.
And you know, um, exercising predictive control over operational execution, that's a bit of a holy grail to achieve.
Right.
But at the very least, you want reaction time to be as rapid as possible.
Yeah. So
Even if that's all you achieve, you're in good shape.
right. So thinking in systems that people say, well, I have a system that's working well. So
Mhm.
you might start to spot if you have limitations, specifically in these 3 points, the reaction time. If the reaction time is long or short, what is a prevention for making shorter? And third, if these reaction times start to be a prediction rather than a reaction or a prevention. So then you say,
That's
if
right.
I don't have these things, probably I have a legacy system that's probably not operating at the best of the capacity, or my data is all scattered. I need to put I don't have the control of what's going on. I don't have the certainty that is my company is operating at the most efficient capacity.
Yeah. And, this goes back to our previous conversation around throughput, right?
Yeah,
Say you got one team that's engaging with the customers early, other ones are doing order taking and sales
right.
and stuff like that. Another team is dealing with order fulfillment, another one is dealing with delivery, another one is dealing
Yeah,
with billing, another one is dealing with collection. That whole cycle,
yeah,
if at each stage, and the orchestration of all of those stages, is in multiple siloed systems that are disconnected, where you
yeah,
can't find, not only can you not find correlations in terms of data, you can't find causal relationships
right.
in your data, delay times and where are things bottlenecking, stuff like that. We spoke about that when it came to the COO's concern about throughput.
Yeah,
And when you built those legacy systems, they were typically, siloed concerns.
yeah,
And you did your best to manage the collection of all of that data, and skilled people in your team being able to connect the dots and come up with good reporting, and you know doing their best with the decision making, and the reaction time. But
yeah,
in today's day and age, you can start depending on software for, there's a lot of things you can't fix people problems with software. I've always said that, right? But you can fix system problems with software. And if
right.
it's a manual system, you're going to definitely see some improvements
Yeah,
with a good piece of software. If you've got legacy siloed systems and manual processes and that kind of stuff, if you've got different departments looking at different metrics with different goals without an oversight of the whole picture, then you really, lack mechanism, your reaction time, that kind of stuff. So
right.
this is why a lot of systems exist, is to solve this
Yeah.
problem.
So, we cover so many things. Actually, it's difficult to say what will be the key thing that somebody listening will have to capture in the organization to say, okay, probably have to think about upgrading or moving into SaaS or SaaS. I mean, cloud or software that is configurable enough to replace our software. And the replacement doesn't need to be, as you say, it's not a big bang issue type thing to do right now. It's could be in stages to start to prove the model and to make sure the configuration start to replicate as much as possible the current systems, and at the same time start to understand what are the building blocks to look into efficiencies in the coming future.
Yeah. Well, look, I guess that's a bit of a self-serving response. We designed Trinity to serve a purpose, right? Now, look, I'm not going to argue with anybody that if they're still depreciating hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of server architecture and custom built software, that they should just pitch it out the window and go with a new strategy, right? That's not a good recommendation to make to anybody, especially when it still represents asset value to your company.
Right.
But there's been a slowdown in people investing that way, in architecture like that, in-house systems and that kind of stuff. And I would say that people are going to age out more and more of it. What it comes down to is, if your company is aging out of legacy systems or is tired of manual processes, if that's your system, then you want to be very selective about what you do next.
Yeah.
Right. And my recommendation is, when it's time, whether you're in that position right now to make a decision, or you expect that in the next year or the next 2 years, you're going to age out of the assets that you own.
Yeah.
That you be very careful about what system you select. First off, I would recommend you don't find anything that your business model can easily outgrow. Don't replace your existing legacy environment with yet another silo. Right?
Yeah.
Make sure that you actually check whether or not there's going to be a linkage between strategic decisions and risk management and metrics, all the way through to operational execution and transaction execution. Right?
Yeah.
They have to be linked. If there's a missing link, you're going to be manually resolving that. There's going to be a lag time that's represented by that link, or you end up with multiple systems and investing in integrations that aren't necessary.
Right.
If the only effective system, and this is what we come across, right, is that in a lot of places, Greenfield sites especially, by Greenfield I mean a company that is growing, but they haven't really invested a lot in software yet. In most of those companies, the one thing that's working just fine is their accounting software. Right. And they've got a few people who are accessing that, and everything is working fine. Now they're scaling up. And quite frankly, the accounting rules aren't changing, and your accounting system is just fine.
Yeah.
Choosing to go with a monolithic ERP adoption and wiping out the one system that's working fine for you, before you make that decision, give us a call and let's talk about it, because that could also be considered a legacy system that has limitations. It's accounting transactions. That's not operational execution. Right. And if you can find a system that sits on top of it, extends it, and allows you to have capability of managing your entire operation without disrupting the one thing that's working just fine for you, that's when I want to encourage somebody to give us a call. So Trinity isn't just a place, to put your data versus some other place to put your data. It's an engine. It turns into, it turns data into decisions, right? And decisions into results. So if your legacy systems are dragging you down, I believe Trinity is an excellent option for how you could rise above that.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great observation, because sometimes people think that outgrow their systems because they using accounting system to do other purposes that are not for the design of the accounting system. It's a different thing. And so they try to do things that actually are not related to accounting and say, oh, our system doesn't respond the way they should.
Well, this is how ERP grew. They called it Enterprise Resource Planning. That's what ERP stands for. But actually, they're add-on modules to finance and controls,
Right.
to your core accounting practices. But and the reason why it evolved that way is because so much operational activity has a financial impact.
Right.
If you're doing sales, if you're doing order execution, if you're doing maintenance, you're spending or you're generating money. So
Yeah.
it seems natural that, that's where those processes should
Yeah.
exist. But quite frankly, I like the idea of keeping your accounting system, which
Yeah.
is like, really important, ring fenced, and keep
Yeah.
it away from everybody having access to that
Yeah.
environment. Keep those skills in-house, layer operations management on top of it, strategy on top of that.
Yeah.
I believe that operations is what should expand, and you add modules. If your
Right.
operations system can generate accounting transactions, then it
Yeah.
becomes quite easy. I'm not saying there isn't an integration there, but integrating between an accounting system and, I mean, your ERP and a whole bunch of other things, that the core is on your accounting system. I
Yeah.
find that a bit of a faulty strategy for somebody to execute in today's day and age, right?
Yeah.
This the best way to approach it is keep what works, add layers on top that can easily integrate with
Yeah.
what works, and then make sure that you have a strategic component. Make sure that there's that integration directly. There's direct relationships in the data
Yeah.
between strategy and execution. That's why
Right.
we spent some extra time, you know, uh, in our AI strategy and that kind of stuff. Is we want all those relationships to exist. It's critical for AI to be most effective when it doesn't have to assume things and impute things and
Right. Right.
find spurious correlations and stuff like that between disparate systems and silos and stuff like that. You know, all the data should be there from strategy execution right into operational execution. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so I think that we have a lot covered today, and thank you very much, Richard, again. So next week we are going to talk about operational inefficiencies and how probably this also continues, or legacy systems also impact as an operational inefficiency.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. See you next week.
Thanks, Frank. Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.